everyone, and welcome back to eCoreAcademy. My name is Anita, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the co-founder and I'm one of the teachers here at eCoreAcademy, along with my younger brother, AJ Raj. In this video, we're going to be looking at a research-based study, another one. I know, it's a special treat, and it's going to tie closely with the last one that was released. And just to get you up to date, the last one that was released was called Causes of the American Revolution, where I shared with you a project that I did in which I analyzed the three main causes of the revolution and obviously how they resulted in the American Revolution. The video I'm going to be doing today is another research-based study, and for those of you who aren't really sure about what this section is about, let me get you up to speed. So the research-based studies section is pretty much going to be a section where you see students such as myself, AJ, and others posing research questions based off of topics that we find interesting. These topics can range from sectors of society and life today, such as business, medicine, law, technology, and they can go to the other end of the spectrum where we talk about specific people. Like, for example, if you saw my Jane Goodall video, or if you saw one of our other students on the platform, Xana, she did a video on Tupac. There are videos like that. And then the video I'm going to be showing you today and the video that was released right before this one, those are on historical topics. So the video we're going to be talking about today is called the Salem Witch Trials. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this topic, but it was definitely an interesting one for me to research. So let me give you some background on how I came about to research this topic. Last summer, actually, I'm a sophomore now, so the summer right before sophomore year, I took an online course to get some advanced credit, and online courses are pretty much where the school gets me hooked with a course online, and I take it by myself, self-paced, independent, self-taught. The course I did was United States History 1 Honors, and what we had to do during this course, obviously it was an honors course, so it was a bit higher level. We had 2 semesters, and each semester we had to do something called a capstone project. So it was a very interesting project, actually, where we had to pick any topic related to American history that we were learning in the course, and we had to make a presentation about it. So for my first semester, I obviously picked the American Revolution, and I analyzed the three causes that I deemed were the most important, and then I supported that information through my research, which was the video that you saw last time. For my second semester, I picked a different topic, still related to American history, and it was the Salem Witch Trials. In this, it was very similar to the first project I did, because in this project, I'm also analyzing the causes of this historical event. So my whole research question, and if you're familiar with our research-based studies, what we do is we first propose a research question so we understand what exactly we're trying to answer with our research. Then we conduct our research, compile our information, and then present it to you all, and so that we can show you what we found, and together as a student community, we can draw our own conclusions about it. Obviously, fact-based conclusions, but conclusions nonetheless that relate to our personal experiences and what we perceive to be, for example, human nature, the way society works, etc. So we can apply those abstract concepts. So in this case, I was talking about the Salem Witch Trials. For those of you who don't know what the Salem Witch Trials were a period of hearings and prosecutions in colonial Massachusetts in which the community in Massachusetts, they accused people of committing witchcraft. So witchcraft was like dark magic, and if you guys have heard of witches, like for example on Halloween, we might make jokes about that now, but that was a serious issue back then, because it occurred between the time frame of February of 1692 to May of 1693. Got those times right. It occurred between that time, so it was a bit longer than a year. But it was a time of great fear, because what happened was about 200 people in that community were accused of witchcraft. Of those 200, 30 were found guilty, and of those 30, 19 were sentenced to death. They were executed by hanging. So that's how extreme these cases got. People who were accused of witchcraft feared that maybe they would end up losing their life if they were not able to prove that they were not witches. Obviously, out of these 200 people, most were innocent people. Community members accused one another because they found some ulterior benefit. For example, in the presentation you're going to see, there was this wealthy I talk about this wealthy family in the community, and whenever they felt that another community member was competing with them for like a political position, or they were growing too wealthy, this influential family would accuse that family of practicing witchcraft, and then that family would have to go through hearings and prosecutions, and they always feared that extreme that they would end up being executed. So people were fearing for their life because of these accusations. And I was trying to investigate, where did this period of great fear come from? And the three main causes I found for the Salem witch trials were hysteria, the cold weather theory, and ergot poisoning. So I did a lot of research, and those were the three main ones that jumped out to me as being the main causes as to why this community suffered from a period of such fear and lack of unity, in a sense. So that's what we're going to investigate in this presentation. So you're going to see a multimedia presentation with me voicing over a bunch of visuals. I hope I do a good job of explaining, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Hello everyone, my name is Anita Raj, and today I am going to be speaking about the research paper I wrote through a cohesive and engaging multimedia presentation. Please enjoy the informative presentation. Before I even begin, I want to share a quick quote with you, said during the Salem witch trials by victim Abigail Williams. And mark this, let either of you breathe a word or the edge of a word about the other things, and I will come to you in the black of some terrible night, and I will bring a pointy reckoning that will shudder you, and you know that I can do it. Although these words were said over 3 centuries ago, the imagery they use and the scene they draw represent a dark and confusing time of fear and prejudice. What emotions do the words in that quote incite in you? Do you feel dread and an ominous sense of doom? Do you feel like somebody is lingering behind you, like the quote was the declaration of a threat? The Salem witch trials of 1693 kept everybody in Salem village and the colony of Massachusetts on his or her toes. Young girls like Abigail Williams and her cousin Betty Paris began the hysteria, and what seemed to be a nonsensical claim that a person possessed the fantastical powers of a witch became the reality of the Puritan settlers. Many people were persecuted, others hanged, and most lived in constant fear. People wished for a stable and safe community to support themselves, their livelihoods, and their families. But the many internal and external factors prevented peaceful lifestyles and instead caused the infamous Salem witch trials. Today I want to cover the topic of the Salem witch trials, which are often overlooked or overshadowed by the rest of American history. I will address the causes of these trials: boredom and guilt, strong Puritan beliefs in the occult, hysteria, the cold weather theory, personal and social differences, the French and Indian Wars, and ergot poisoning. Before I get into some details about the causes, let me refresh you on the background information leading up to the Salem witch trials. Abigail Williams, a girl of age 11 or 12, is remembered by history as one of the first children who, along with her 9-year-old cousin, Betty Paris, accused their neighbor, John Proctor, of witchcraft. Once their claims were heard by the public ear, they eventually led to the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials began in the spring of 1692. A group of girls in Salem Village, Massachusetts, claimed to be possessed by the devil. They pointed their fingers at and accused several local women of witchcraft. Hysteria soon spread throughout Massachusetts, so a special court was formed to address these accusations of witchcraft. In June of the same year, the first witch, Bridget Bishop, was found guilty and hanged at Salem's Gallows Hill. Following her were 18 others, and a total of 150 men, women, and children were accused of witchcraft. Abigail Williams and Betty Paris played a major role in these Salem witch trials, as mentioned before. The cousins would often scream and flail, so when a doctor tried to cure them, he claimed they had been bewitched. The cousins blamed an old woman named Sarah Osborne, a beggar named Sarah Good, and their Caribbean household slave, Tituba. The 3 women were taken to court, and surprisingly, Tituba confessed. She said that she and the others were sent by the devil to harm Puritans. Like Tituba, several accused witches confessed and listed others who were witches like them. The trials grew so abundant that the local courts were overwhelmed. After many hangings, Minister Cotton Mather and his father, President Increase Mather of Harvard College, condemned the witch trials, claiming it was better to let 10 witches go than sentence one innocent person to death. The Massachusetts General Court recognized the errors of the Salem witch trials by allotting a day to fasting. The Massachusetts General Court went on to annul guilty verdicts against accused witches. Indemnities were granted to families which suffered losses, but bitterness lingered in the Salem community. The painful legacy of the Salem witch trials lingered for generations to come. Many claim that the Salem witch trials may have been caused by the harsh lives in the Puritan community of Salem Village following the trauma of French and Indian wars, a recent smallpox epidemic, paranoia of Native American attacks, and jealousy of the affluent Salem town. But we should look at the specific reasons I have cited for the Salem witch trials and the evidence collected that supports each claim. The first reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of boredom and guilt. Although boredom and guilt seem to pale in comparison to the other causes of the Salem witch trials, boredom and guilt seem to be the most mundane root cause that historians identify. Young girls such as Abigail Williams and Betty Paris began the rumors, so the theory is that young girls were very bored because there was not much to do in Salem Village. This was because the Puritans held very strict beliefs which forbade many forms of entertainment, not only for adults but for children too. For girls, the restrictions on what could be done were more severe than they were for boys. Girls were only permitted to read books or join circles of friends to tell fortunes and stories, during which the concept of witchcraft is predicted to develop. Therefore, many believe that the young girls who began the accusations were only doing so because they had no other outlet for entertainment. Guilt may have also been a factor in causing the Salem witch trials. Abigail Williams and Betty Paris started to exhibit strange behavior, for they began to hide under furniture, scream, and bark like rabid dogs. Samuel Paris, the minister father of Betty, had a physician look at the cousins, and because nothing was physically wrong with them, they were diagnosed with bewitchment. However, modern historians think the two cousins began to act strangely after they got frightened from participating in a fortune-telling game. The two girls may have wanted an outlet, for they spent most of their time completing chores and studying the Bible. This boredom may explain why Betty Paris and Abigail Williams became so interested in the fortune-telling and magical stories their slave, Tituba, told them. Because this was one of their only outlets for activity, they found themselves drawn to the superstitions. Many believe that Betty and Abigail's strange behavior was a combination of the guilt they felt in participating in such forbidden supernatural activities, along with the fear of the bad omens they heard. Overall, the first reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of boredom and guilt. The second reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of strong Puritan beliefs in the occult. The Puritan community of Salem Village had taken after the belief of witchcraft, which had been rampant in Europe throughout the 14th century. There had always been a belief in the supernatural, especially the devil's tendency of giving certain humans the power to harm others in return for their loyalty. These humans were witches. Therefore, the Puritans had always entertained the idea of witches and witchcraft. But the Salem witch trials made it seem as though witches were a present and imminent threat in their society. By striking alliances with the devil, witches were seen as willing to do anything possible to harm the Puritans with the dark magic they had been granted. Witches were blamed for all kinds of misfortunes, from illnesses and failed crops to bad weather and other things that would have had a rational explanation during times like the Enlightenment. Because witches and witchcraft were seen as real threats, the Puritans automatically resorted to their beliefs in the occult to reason for disaster. When young girls in the community were being affected by witchcraft, community leaders were willing to hang suspected witches because fear and belief in the occult were so strong. The people of Salem Village thought God intervened in their lives and that everything was a message from God. Since life had become tough in the new colony with the French and Indian War going on, people believed the devil was near them as an immediate threat. Overall, the second reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of strong Puritan beliefs in the occult. The third reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of hysteria. Medical sociologists have claimed that the Salem witch trials were a case of conversion disorder, a mental condition in which the victim suffers from neurological symptoms which were induced by psychological conflict, commonly known as mass hysteria. Psychological distress caused by external factors in the community may have translated to physical aches and pains, but this may have been misinterpreted as bewitchment. This may hold true, for life in Salem Village was difficult for residents, and many of the bewitched girls, such as Abigail Hobbs, Mercy Lewis, Susanna Sheldon, and Sarah Churchwell, were war refugees who had lived in Maine. They were personally affected by the French and Indian Wars to the point where historians theorize they may have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. What these girls felt may have triggered the shared delusion that among the villagers lived Satan and his witches, a notion which came to inspire the witch hunt. Additionally, once the mass hysteria began, it spread through the Massachusetts court system and made the courts corrupt. They were biased against people who were brought forth accused of being witches. The accused was not given the same legal rights as a normal person. People could be convicted due to spectral evidence, meaning if someone claimed to see either spectral or ghost, they could be imprisoned. Also, courtrooms of the present normally ignore hearsay, gossip, surmises, and unproven assertions of the public. However, colonial America's courtrooms took such things into consideration. Additionally, suspects could not appeal to the court, for they could not call upon witnesses nor seek legal counsel. To make matters worse, the head of the Court of Oyer and Terminer, the court which heard cases pertaining to witchcraft, was Chief Justice William Phipps, who was a biased and avid witch hunter. If mass hysteria had not been legitimized in the court system, then suspects could have received a fair trial. Overall, the third reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of hysteria. The fourth reason the Salem witch trials occurred is explained by the cold weather theory. A student of Harvard University named Emily Oster wrote in her senior thesis that she identified that witchcraft accusations and witch hunts occurred more frequently during times of extreme cold. During this time, crops struggled to grow, and important fish such as cod found the oceans too cold to migrate to the north. The agricultural and fishing industries were suffering, and Puritans faced other external hardships which came with the weather, so they may have been specifically seeking someone or something to blame for their misfortunes. Also, the notorious witch hunt took place during a time period known as the so-called Great Witch Craze. This time period actually coincided with what is known as the Little Ice Age, a period of abnormally cold weather between the mid-14th and mid-19th century. At the end of the day, the Puritans believed that witches possessed the kind of powerful and strong magic that could be used to manipulate forces of nature, such as the weather and seasons. Because the cold made most people bitter about the failures of the industries their livelihoods depended on, they blamed witches for their bad finances and difficult lives. Overall, the fourth reason the Salem witch trials occurred is explained by the cold weather theory. The fifth reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of personal and social differences. As previously mentioned, many internal factors also affected the development of the witch trials in Salem Village. One factor was that many villagers were jealous of the affluent Salem town, and the other was that people lived a bland life which was also full of hardship. They saw very little fruit in their lifetimes and did not have much reason to continue. In other words, many of these villagers were bored, miserable, and unsuccessful. Salem Village was divided due to local politics, religion, and economics. One of the most persistent issues in Salem Village was the matter of who was the authoritative figure. Salem Village had seen 3 ministers in just 16 years due to disputes over who was qualified to have the position. At the time of the Salem witch trials, the village was arguing over the current minister, Betty Parris's father, Samuel Parris. Additionally, there were many family feuds, land disputes, and general confusion and uncertainty because the Massachusetts Bay Colony had had its charter revoked. The British Crown replaced the charter in 1691 and gained much more control over the colonists. Often, people who got involved in the controversy around politics, religion, and economics in the village would be accused of witchcraft and find themselves on trial, and this was mainly because of the Putnam family and Reverend Samuel Parris. About 50 people were directly or indirectly accused by members of the Putnam family. The Putnams strictly followed the Puritan beliefs and customs, and they strongly supported Samuel Parris, initiator of the witch hunt. People did try to stand up to these forces. In an election for town selectmen, Daniel Andrew and Philip English beat the Putnams, and they were shortly convicted of heresy. Rebecca Nurse, whose husband, Francis Nurse, had taken a village committee office in October of 1691 and expressed his distaste of Reverend Samuel Parris, was also soon put on trial for witchcraft. The Putnam's rival family, the Porters, tried to organize villagers against the trials. However, the attempt failed and 19 supporters got accused of witchcraft. There were also personal differences that some of Salem's villagers needed to settle. To be more specific, the Salem witch trials is also hypothesized to be the result of teenage angst against overbearing parents and historical patriarchy. In John Putnam's book, Entertaining Satan, Witchcraft in the Culture of Early New England, he theorizes that the witch trials were essentially a teenage rebellion against the authority of their elderly parents. This makes sense because the accusers were teenagers and many of the accused were adults. Many accused teenagers, especially, to be lying about their illness and bewitchment. Meanwhile, feminists have seen the Salem witch trials as an excuse to persecute women, as most of the accused were women who did not follow societal norms. Overall, the fifth reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of social and personal differences. The sixth reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of the French and Indian Wars. Many theories suggest that the French and Indian Wars of the 17th century fueled the hysteria around witchcraft. King Philip's War raged in the colonies at the time. The front lines were only about 70 miles away from Salem. Most people in the region had been impacted in some way, and many of the villagers in Salem were actually refugees from places being torn apart by war. Additionally, Native Americans often attacked settlements in Massachusetts, leaving the colonists in positions of constant fear and anxiety. They were constantly worrying about having their homes or belongings seized during the raids or meeting an untimely and violent death at the hands of the Indians. Prospering communities were ruined and people and their property were decimated. Families which had called Maine their home for 2 or 3 generations were killed or forced to leave behind their homes, fields, livestock, and possessions of value. As previously mentioned, many of the young girls who had started the witchcraft conspiracies by behaving absurdly had been some of the first to experience these raids, and post-traumatic stress may have caused them to act strangely. A snowball effect occurred, turning the issue into mass hysteria. There is another explanation of how the French and Indian Wars affected the Salem witch trials. In addition, town officials tried to shift their own inadequate defense of the frontier against the natives to people like George Burroughs, who was accused and executed at the witch trials after his small, failed campaigns against the natives. The Puritans convinced themselves that it was the devil, not the war going on, that threatened them, for they did not want to appear weak. They genuinely believed that safety in the hands of God was just another witch hanging away, and by killing all the servants of the devil, They were ridding their communities of the death and trauma they had felt at the hands of the war. At the end of the day, the Puritans misdirected their emotions on these so-called witches. The community of Salem had been greatly affected by the French and Indian Wars. There were refugees, militiamen, and runners to Boston's front line who all sought residence in the village. It seems that everybody involved with the witchcraft crisis had some connection to the ongoing wars. Overall, the sixth reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of the French and Indian Wars. The seventh and final reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of ergot poisoning. Amongst all sources reviewed, this cause has consistently appeared in each one, and it is what historians believe was at the root of the bewitchment craze. This theory was proposed in the scientific journal Science by a woman named Linda Caporael in 1976. The previous harvest of 1691 had been a year of bad harvest, and many areas faced food shortages. The low food supply forced villagers of Salem to use rye grain in their bread since it was unaffected by the bad harvest. The ergot fungus, however, grows on rye flour, replacing grain with a hard purplish bundle of fungus that has ergot alkaloids. It has been found that the ergot fungus, which the drug LSD is derived from, can cause hallucinations, muscle spasms, and a type of drug-induced state. Some argue that this theory is not plausible, for epidemics of convulsive ergotism have occurred mainly in settlements where the locals suffered from vitamin A deficiencies. However, the residents of Salem did not suffer from such a deficiency because they had an abundance of dairy and fish as supplements of vitamin A as well. Additionally, the accusers did not usually exhibit all the symptoms of ergot poisoning, and some witch trials took place where rye was not grown. On the other hand, Dr. Alan Wolfe claims that 1691 was a cold winter following a humid spring and summer, making the conditions best for ergot growth. The failure of crops forced the New Englanders to turn to the fresh yet infected rye. Other theories include that the bewitched girls had been affected by encephalitis lethargica, epilepsy, Lyme disease, a toxic weed called devil's trumpet, or loco weed. Overall, the seventh and final reason the Salem witch trials occurred was because of ergot poisoning. In conclusion, the Salem witch trials occurred because of boredom and guilt, strong Puritan beliefs in the occult, hysteria, the cold weather theory, personal and social differences, the French and Indian Wars, and ergot poisoning. Many historians think the most mundane cause of the trials was that young girls in the strict, no entertainment allowed Puritan community wanted an outlet for their wild imaginations. Others think that guilt of indulging in fortune-telling activities made them behave weirdly after hearing fearful omens. The Puritans also had a long-standing belief in the occult. They had held the belief that witches were servants of the devil, so when some were convinced witches lived in the community, the Puritans did not find the accusation to be preposterous. Additionally, mass hysteria was described as conversion disorder, where a bad psychological state made the young girls act out and seem like they were bewitched. Mass hysteria legitimized the Puritan claim that witches existed and corrupted the court systems. Another theory is the cold weather theory, meaning that the cold weather, which made crop harvest difficult and did not let fish migrate to the north, ruined industry and embittered people. People sought a scapegoat, and witches were made to blame. Personal and social differences were also factors, for there were many feuding families who argued over the authority of Salem Village once the charter of Massachusetts Bay Colony was revoked. Families accused other families of being witches out of personal spite as well. The French and Indian Wars also impacted the community, for the young girls who were bewitched and witnessed the war firsthand suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and thus did not act normally because they were bothered children. Lastly, poisoning from eating the ergot fungus present in rye bread may have put young girls in a drug-induced state, causing them to act bewitched. At the end of the day, the Salem witch trials were a period of fear and supernatural beliefs. They revealed the true workings and characteristics of a hard-hit and suffering society, and they are important to learn from, so such religious ignorance and persecution are not tolerated ever again. Thank you for joining me in analyzing research of the main causes of the Salem witch trials. My name is Anita Raj, and I hope that presentation was informative but enjoyable. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, it was all about the Salem witch trials, and I think it's a very interesting topic. It was one of the most interesting topics I've ever done research on. Hope you found it interesting as well. Because again, like I said, when we think about witches now, we think about maybe media, for example, TV shows and movies. We think about Halloween. We kind of laugh at the concept of, oh, it's a witch. But back then in colonial Massachusetts in the late 1690s, sorry, it was a cause of great fear. It was a cause of fearing for your life, essentially. So you can just see how the patterns of fear change over time in society, how different methods are used to oppress people, persecute people, and essentially wipe out the people you don't want in society. So I think the Salem witch trials were very important in understanding what could happen to a community like the colonial Massachusetts community that was so hard hit, that faced so many struggles, trying to thrive, trying to just form a community in a sense. Because remember, these people were colonists, so they came to a new land. They were trying to create new lives for themselves. So obviously, there was some fear, there was some lack of unity, and just look what it caused—a period of great fear. So I think it's important that we learn from periods like this, so obviously we don't repeat this in the future. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found my causes, the 3 causes I cited, to align with your opinions. And honestly, I'd like to hear what you'd have to say. So drop comments down below of what you think. Otherwise, if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe button, post notification bell, drop that comment down below, and share using our socials. Thank you for watching, and look out for our next research-based study.